In an old Victorian house in California, a team of parapsychologists sit with the family in the living room. They're interviewing the ghost of a woman named Lois through an 11-year-old boy.
I did ask things like, so Lois, what was it like when you were dying? As she was dying in the hospital, she knew she was dying. She said that she closed her eyes in the hospital, and the next thing she knew, she was in the living room of the house. At this point in my career, I didn't know what I believed about apparitions, about ghosts, honestly.
This wasn't Loyd Auerbach's first paranormal investigation, but this particular case would fundamentally transform what he believed.
It absolutely did move me to the point where I believe consciousness could survive death.
What really happens when we die? Where does our consciousness go? For Loyd, those questions aren't just about belief. They're scientific.
It's not some sort of conspiracy. We're trying to figure out what's really going on.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of No Ordinary Monday. Thank you so much for joining us. I am your host Chris Barron, and each week I sit down with a guest whose job is far from ordinary. We're going to explore how they got there, what it's really like behind the scenes, and then I'm going to ask them to relive the single most unforgettable experience of their career. Now, before we dive in, a very, very quick announcement. I have been blown away by how many of you have tuned in since we launched a couple of months ago. I'm so grateful to you guys that you're enjoying the show. And to celebrate this amazing response, we have launched a brand new community page on Facebook. This is where you can share your own stories, help shape the show, and connect with guests and other listeners. You'll find the link in the show notes below, and look forward to seeing you all there. Okay, so on to this week's guest. Loyd Auerbach is one of the world's leading parapsychologists, a scientist who has spent over 4 decades studying what most of us would call the paranormal. He's taught university programs, led hundreds of field investigations, and helped transform how serious researchers approach the study of psychic and ghostly phenomena across the world. What makes Loyd so fascinating is his refusal to simply believe in this stuff. He is really dedicated to understanding what is actually going on. And as you heard in that intro, one case in particular has had a profound effect on him. Inside a quiet Victorian house in California, Loyd found himself doing something no scientist ever expects to do: interviewing a ghost. You're listening to No Ordinary Monday. Let's get into the show. All right, Loyd, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
Very good, thanks. It's kind of the end of my day, but doing really well.
Yeah, well, I want to sort of kick things off. You're a parapsychologist, I guess, if you were to call yourself something. I guess what would be great is just to sort of describe for people what that is. And, because a lot of people would, probably go straight, with a topic like this, they go straight to movies and popular culture. You've got,
right.
Ghostbusters and reality TV ghost hunting shows, and you've got all the Warrens and the Conjuring movies and that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
How do you set that apart?
Well, I one of the good thing about pop culture is people are familiar with it, so I can use that and talk about what it really is. So parapsychology is really the study of what we call psychic phenomena, which includes the ability that people seem to have to pick up information without the use of the normal senses, without logical or intuitive inference. We call that extrasensory perception. The ability to affect things with their mind directly. We call that mind over matter consciousness. And it's not just moving objects. It's not just there's a range of things that fall in there. And then there's the idea that consciousness, can shift out of the body for a time. In out-of-body experiences can pick up information about possibly what the other side is when people have near-death experiences. There's this whole segment of what people would call reincarnation cases of children who remember previous lives, which are really amazing, because if they're not reincarnation, what in the world are they? And that's a whole different question in itself.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we have the ghostly phenomena. So parapsychologists look at these. We look at people's experiences, and for the kinds of abilities or experiences or phenomena we can bring into the laboratory, We have been doing that since almost the beginning in the late 1800s, but more in controlled experiments starting around the 1930s for that. So unfortunately, we can't bring a ghost into the lab because we can't get them to stick to a schedule, but that's a whole different story. Um, but, pop culture it can be useful. When Ghostbusters came out, I was actually part of a graduate parapsychology program at John F. Kennedy University. That's where I got my degree originally. And we got tons of calls from media. There was no internet at that point. That was 1984. And the question that always came up was, we know you guys don't do that. What do you really do? And that was the best question that I think we could ever possibly be asked by anyone, starting with a pop culture, beginning there, a prompt like that. And continually, I'm very familiar with pop culture. Even though I don't tend to watch anything to do with the Warrens, I'm very aware of the Conjuring movies and things like that. They were not parapsychologists. Demonology is not a science. It has nothing to do with the field of parapsychology at all. It comes from religion. So there's just this unfortunate mishmash, partly because of Halloween. That was until YouTube and the paranormal TV shows really started going year round. We would only really be busy with media in October.
Yeah.
Because of Halloween. And it would be witches, it would be, it would be everything, folklore, all sorts of stuff.
I guess from you guys consider yourself a scientist, and from what I hear, it sounds very much like a science. But from the perspective of the scientific community, would they, the scientific community at large, would they consider you guys scientists, or is there a disconnect there?
Well, certainly the laboratory work that's done by parapsychologists, partly because our field's been so paranoid, with the skeptics especially, that we have we have been doing double-blind experiments for many, many, many decades, sometimes triple-blind, sometimes quadruple-blind studies, and double-checking the statistics on that, really being very careful on what the statistics even say, and sometimes even being careful how you interpret the results. It's very important to not only follow strict scientific protocols, but here's an interesting thing. A lot of mainstream scientists think we're not, still talk about us being a pseudoscience. The field of parapsychology, the Parapsychological Association, has been a member field of the American Association for the Advancement of Sciences since 1969. So there's that recognition. A few years ago, one of my colleagues, Ed May, who was actually the program director for the government Stargate program, the remote viewing program for many years. His background is in physics, and he was putting together with a colleague a 2-volume book looking at some of the best evidence for ESP, the best research for ESP, but he wanted to bring in people who were skeptics to look at the research and say what they thought about the evidence, about the results. Ed was able to talk some of these folks into doing that. And surprise, surprise, they were impressed. They still didn't necessarily agree with, I don't know if it's really this thing you call ESP, but they were very impressed at the quality of the research that was actually done, which is something that we get dinged on all the time, that we have bad methodology. And the answer is, we have better methodology. In fact, some of these folks actually said we had better methodology and better controls than most psychology experiments.
Wow. And is that, I guess that the issue comes down to the fact that the things that the phenomena that you guys are studying are inherently difficult and more open to interpretation than quote unquote traditional sciences or whatever. Is that where the troubles come?
That's part of it. But I think a lot of it is the folklore that's behind it. And also the number of practitioners who are either frauds or really bad at it. The people who call themselves psychics. And we get conflated with them also all the time. And the thing you have to look at too is, parapsychology is a social science, like psychology, like sociology. There are different interpretations of people's behavior, cross-culturally and otherwise. There are things that cannot be duplicated in the laboratory or even identified in a laboratory under controlled conditions. It's a social science. We're dealing with human beings. Human beings are not machines.
I think that's where it comes down to, is that, as you said, you can't take any of these phenomena inside a laboratory condition and poke and prod them and scan them and whatever.
ESP and PK can be brought into the laboratory and has been for a long time, because you can set up a situation very easily where the
True.
person could not possibly have known the information they're providing. And that was done with the remote viewing experiments and still is being done with
Mhm.
remote viewing. And the thing is that, as Ed likes to put it, 19 government agencies came to the remote viewing folks to do tasks, to do something, to get intelligence or information.
Yeah.
17 of those agencies kept coming back. So what does that say? Did they
Wow.
get
Yeah.
useful information or not?
Amazing. I mean, the one thing I really wanted to find out is that, you do, I really wanted to talk to you about, is that you do a lot of investigations.
Yeah.
I know part of your role is education and media and things like that, but I really wanted to see, how do these investigations work? I guess people have a way of reaching out, they experience stuff. Just walk us through what it is like to be an investigator and what happens on these cases.
So, unlike the TV shows, which is when I get cases, often it's a follow-up because they have the local ghost hunter group that came in and did everything, screwed everything up for them.
Yeah.
But the one thing we do is focus on what they experienced, when, where, in the house or wherever it was. So in other words, we're starting with the ghost story, the experience itself. So when my students say, ask me, what's the most important tool somebody investigating can have? It's interviewing skills, which include listening, not just having a list of questions to ask somebody. That's a really important thing. So getting all that information as much as possible up front. In a typical investigation call, I would want to do a pre-interview on the phone with the principal, whoever had the most experiences. But if I could, talk to anyone else living in the place who had experiences, but also if there is a family member there or someone else who did not have any experiences while they did, I want to talk to them too. And I also want to ask them, what solutions have you tried to find yourself? What else have you done?
Yeah. And do you, I guess a lot of the work, as I said, is mostly is talking to people and understanding their experiences.
Right.
Because a lot of people might assume that technology would come into it in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah. So
Does it?
So it sort of does. It sort of does. So we have been doing investigations in parapsychology, psychical research, well before what we would call modern technology, certainly before electronics. There are a lot of tools that have been used, but basically when you go on site to places, you explore the entire site. You really have to look at how things are set up. Hopefully, if you're a good investigator with good training in parapsychology, you'll start noticing things that might be alternative explanations. Because even if they had a legitimate apparition experience, usually most people are on a little bit on edge, or they're looking for more. And so let's say a picture falls off the wall. The ghost did it, because that doesn't normally happen. They hear a weird noise at night. That was the house settling, or something hit the house. There's a raccoon outside. We have to go through all of those little things. And then we look for the pattern of the experiences as they are reported and in relation to the location. And finally, for technology, the equipment, how does the environment affect all this? Or is there an effect of the paranormal on the environment? I mean, that's what we're really looking for. So for example, I had a case where we had a lot of good witnesses to this little girl's ghost and also an elder man's ghost in a house that was built just after the American Civil War. And sometimes neighbors, housekeeper, all sorts of people seeing these folks. And I was working with Japanese television, actually, on a number of specials, working with a medium from Japan who actually did work with Japanese police. But during a session where she was conversing with this little girl's ghost, which none of us could see, we had a whole bunch of people, not just the Japanese crew. I had some other colleagues with me as well. Every piece of equipment we had different kinds of electromagnetic field sensors. We have a couple of guys from the University of Florida there. We had different kinds of temperature sensors. We had a Geiger counter. We had a geomagnetic sensing station looking at the Earth's magnetic field. We had all sorts of stuff, and every bit of it was going off. and it was going off closer to where she said the little girl's ghost was. We even had thermal vision camera, and the thermal vision was picking up something like pulsing in midair, a heat pulse, which the company said was not possible. Then all of that correlated to what she was doing. All right, so that's the important thing. We
Weird.
even had a like a spike in the geomagnetic field that knocked it out, the chart recorder off kilter, so we had to recalibrate. So when you have something like that going on, all right, you may not be able to say there's a ghost here, but the one thing you can say is this woman was picking up on something that would had a physical impact on the environment on multiple levels. And she was perceiving this as a little girl, as
Amazing.
had other people in the house.
I mean, a lot of those experiences that you described sound exciting and unusual, not particularly like malevolent or anything like that, but people would often assume this stuff is scary or people will have fear over this kind of stuff. I mean, any cases that you found that, I mean, I guess a lot of people might call up because they are afraid,
Right.
but have you found anything scary in these cases?
Only living people? Seriously, I mean, I have no fear of anything supernatural. We don't even use the word supernatural, anything paranormal,
Yeah.
any of these experiences. I mean, to me, the worst they could do is what one of my brothers tried to do is jump out of a closet and try to scare me with going, boo, kind of thing, surprise kind of thing. There's nothing that's going to hurt that way. So psychologically, you can certainly have impact. There's no question about that. But it's living, and I've had situations with a couple of different cases with living people, and it was alcoholics or drunks, and it was not good to be there. Let's put it that way. So it's really what I tell my students: always remember, ghosts don't carry guns and knives, and you generally are okay with that. On the other hand, folklore from different parts of the world and religion has this downplay or brings in that whole demon, malevolence, devilish thing. In fact, I just reading about a report about a recent meeting of the Council of Exorcists or whatever. I can't even remember what the consortium is called for the Vatican, because there are exorcists still for the Vatican. And one of them was making a statement that there's no such thing as psychic ability. It's all from the devil because it has to come from God or it comes from the devil. And God doesn't give these powers to live to people.
Yeah.
So the assumption, therefore, is that, and I've heard this before from somebody who was connected, was extremely religious in one way. And assuming, and people have accused us occasionally that, we're doing the work of the devil because we're talking about human experiences. And yet there are groups of Christianity, certain sects in Christianity that as soon as they got somebody who can do something special, they'll use that person for whatever way they can. So it's okay, I guess, in that circumstance.
So that side of things with the religious aspect of things, you got demons and the devil and all that kind of stuff, like that kind of sits apart from all the work that you do, I presume.
It does. Again, we have to deal with people's beliefs to a great extent, but we try, the fact is that, and I've had people say, we need somebody to bring in, can you come in with an exorcist? Like, no, you're calling the wrong person. We're, from a scientific perspective, that's not science, that's magic. And you're doing a ritual, which is technically magic, kind of like witchcraft is magic. It's that same sorcery. It's magic. I respect other people's beliefs in that way. I'm just not the right person. And we are not approaching things that way. And we can't. I mean, if you think about one important thing, whatever people believe, if we're talking about a god or gods, one of the qualities of gods is that they're kind of unknowable. You can't put them to scientific tests. If it's the big God with a big G instead of individual gods from other cultures, there's nothing you can do. No way to detect God. This is about faith, right? You can't measure faith, and you can't do that kind of connection. So when you then talk about the devil or Satan and demons, which are fallen angels and all of that, they're creations of that magical being. Science can't do that. Can't touch that. So we can't approach things from that perspective. And frankly, what we know, what J.B. Rhine in the 30s, his approach was very appropriate, is that everybody can tap into this a little bit. We have experiences all the time that are merged into our sensory experiences, our perceptions, and we don't consider these paranormal at all. These are normal. It's just that
Yeah.
humans in different cultures have set limitations on what we can do, what our capabilities happen to be.
Hmm.
So we're
Interesting.
trying to figure out what makes
Yeah.
us human. That's there are two real important questions: is what is it about this phenomena that says something about what makes us human and what humans are capable of doing, and what is consciousness? How's consciousness fit into all this?
Yeah, that's where it all is. Yeah. I mean, I always love asking folks like, it's like, 'cause you get such amazing experiences and such an amazing, uh, I guess, career. What, just give us a sense of your, I guess, call it origin story. What led you into this particular path in the first place, and how did you just become fascinated and so passionate about it?
Well, I will say my origin story is going to be a little bit disappointing to people because I know I've disappointed them before. It's not like I had a
You didn't
big
have a ghost
experience.
experience as a kid.
No, I didn't have any of that. My ghostly experiences were, watching TV as a little kid because I pretty much had a TV set accessible to me when I was 2 because my dad worked for
Yeah.
NBC. And I watched The Twilight Zone when I was young, but there was a show called One Step Beyond, which took reported psychic experiences that they often got from the archives of various organizations, and they dramatized them. And then I got hooked. Well, first I actually started watching Star Trek when it was originally on, so I got to watch the first few episodes, and they had a lot of psychic stuff there. But at the same time, I started
Yeah.
watching a show called Dark Shadows. And
Yeah.
I should back up and tell you that my dad was involved in the NBC News coverage of the Mercury and Gemini space shots. So I
Mm.
took the
Wow.
science. I
Yeah.
was heavily interested in astronomy and space science and geology as well. So I was a little science geek. And when Dark Shadows, which was a fun folklore show with vampires and stuff, they mentioned parapsychology. It was the first time I heard that word. So I went to the library and I found books not only about vampires and werewolves in the one section of the Dewey Decimal System. Sadly, that's where parapsychology books are as well. But that's
Yeah.
actually a good thing because that's how I discovered that there were science books on parapsychology. So
Interesting.
that was when I was
Wasn't
about
just folklore.
13 years old. Yeah, I found the science books. I started reading parapsychology. It seemed to me, that these were unanswered questions. So you might say it was a mystery that got me intrigued about all this. I met some other people in college through my studies at Northwestern. So it really was, there were a lot of things in the universe put things in my path.
Yeah, you studied cultural anthropology, was it?
I
Western,
studied
right?
cultural anthropology with a focus on supernatural folklore because that's,
Wow.
and interestingly enough, anthropologists have written about people's psychic experiences because they can get away with it and not have to worry about somebody.
Well, one of the the big things we love doing on this podcast is to ask a guest to come on to share sort of the most significant standout story of their experience. And we chatted a little bit about it on our
Hmm.
pre-call, but it's a fascinating case. And I guess it's one that, just to preface it, it's sort of one that stands out because it kind of like, it feels really, there's no explanation to it, right?
Yeah. No good explanation, at least. Yeah.
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 Take us through that from the beginning. Yeah.
Sure. Sure. This is during the time period in the early 80s when we had a parapsychology program at John F. Kennedy University, and it was post Ghostbusters. So lots of people knew about us, about me, because a ton of we were like the real life Ghostbusters in that sense. So I got this call from this woman who was a family law attorney in Livermore, California. And she said, I saw you on some TV show and we just wanted to talk to you about what's going on with my son. And it's like, what's going on with your son? And she said, well, apparently he's been seeing and talking to a ghost for over a year and a half since we moved into this house, this old house, Victorian house in Livermore. I said, really? And so start talking to her about this. And first thing I find out is, yeah, he wasn't the only one who had seen the ghost. Turned out when he started talking about this and she started talking to her husband about it and her mother, who occasionally came to visit, all of them, the adults had been seeing this woman once a week or so. And the mother-in-law or the grandmother, when she was actually visiting from time to time, they didn't
Hmm.
do what the kid did. So it all started because they bought this house in an estate sale. The only living relative of the woman who had passed away not in the home. So that's a big misconception. She died
Interesting.
in the
Yeah.
hospital.
Yeah.
Um, the only living relative was in assisted living, and his attorney would not let the family talk to him at all. But they bought the house. They bought all sorts of furniture. I mean, they got a lot of it really nice furniture the woman had. There was a porcelain doll collection with dolls from all over the world in a collector's case on the wall, all sorts of stuff. And what happened was the woman came home from work one day. Her son's there. He's looking at the porcelain doll collection, and turns to his mother and says, "Mom, that doll is from Dresden and this doll is from," and she's like, "Did you find paperwork? We've been through the house to look for everything we could." No,
Yeah.
Lois told me. And she's like, "Well, who's Lois? One of your teachers?" "No, the ghost that you, dad, and grandma are seeing but aren't talking about." At which point she became an interrogator. She told me she interrogated her son. Come to find out that they had all, when they were moving in, and they were all like not willing individually, not as they found out later, not willing to say anything to either of they didn't want anybody else to think they were crazy, didn't want to scare
Yeah.
anybody. Chris, the
Yeah.
boy who was almost 11 years old at the time, he saw this woman walking through the living room. She turned and waved at him, which is something similar to what she was
What?
doing to the others. And he waved back.
Yeah.
And she didn't
Yeah.
disappear like she would do with the others. She actually stopped and started talking to him. And she was the previous resident who was born in the house herself after it was first built. Her family moved in there.
Yeah.
So he had started having information about her and other things. And so the mother, Pat, was not, none of them were afraid at all because nothing bad had happened. But she was concerned. And her concern was, my son's about to be a teenager. He's talking to a ghost every day. And is that a good thing
Yeah.
growing up? And my first response was, well, before we even talk about the investigation, I think I'm going to get a reference for you for a child psychologist from
Yeah.
JFK,
Of
and I want
course.
you to take him there and have him talk. And I made sure I got somebody who was skeptical, but not a believer, not a disbeliever, but someone else. Before I actually went to the house, I met with him for lunch with permission of the family. He said to me, "This kid is the most mature kid at this age I've ever met." He said he tells me he runs all his problems by Lois, and she helps him and advises him. He said if the kid clients I work with, all had Lois as a day therapist, I would be out of business. So he was impressed. He said, I don't know if it's really a
Yeah.
ghost but he was blown away.
Well-adjusted kid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So going down there, university was about 40-minute drive from Livermore. And at the time, it was between sessions, and most of my students were kind of to the wind, visiting family and
Mm.
such. So the receptionist we had, one of our counseling students, Kip, was JFK University at the time had an average age of 35 to 40 years old. Mostly people who returned after being away from college for a while. So Kip came with me. He was very interested in hearing about the case. And my wife, my first wife, my wife at the time, Joanna, was with me as well. And we drove down, got in the car at the university, drove down to Livermore. And in the cars, we're talking, this was an older car that was going to be replaced. We were talking about the car I wanted to buy. And Joanna was complaining about her job. She was working as a secretary at a law firm, wanted to quit, and trying to figure out what to do next. And we're asking Kip about his background because he was away from from school for a while. He was a professional
Yeah.
dancer in LA for television, which is unusual in itself.
Very unusual.
And
Yeah.
the family did not know who was coming with me at all. I just said I was bringing people with
Yeah.
me. So we get to the house. We're met at the door by Pat, her mom, and Chris. The husband was out of town. He was on some sort of corporate thing. So, or he was avoiding us. I wasn't sure exactly what. But Chris then turns to this empty space and says, "And this is Lois." So, of course, we said, "Hi,
Okay.
Lois," because, in
Yeah.
that situation, what do you
Be
do?
polite.
Yeah, be polite.
Yeah.
Then we were taken on a tour of the house. And as we're walking around, Chris is telling us stories of the family that Lois participated in growing up and
Hmm.
otherwise, and also talking about the history of Livermore that Lois told her about, which honestly, I completely separated the history stuff because the kid could have read stuff pretty easily
For
at
sure.
school.
Yeah.
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 So we then end up sitting in the living room, and it's a semicircle with Chris next to me, and then an empty easy chair, which is apparently where Lois was sitting, though not
Okay.
only Chris
Her
could see
favorite
her at that
chair.
time. And then the others were there as well. And the questions, I asked more questions about um, the family. And one of the things I want to know is how do we get in touch with your cousin, the living relative? His attorney's blocking, and we got enough information for me to talk to him. Actually, from Chris,
To track him down and find him.
it was not that hard after I got the information from Chris, or I should say from
Oh my
Lois.
God. Yeah. So
She
you were sat down and you were talking to the little boy Chris, but he was essentially like the interpreter.
I'm kind of talking both. I'm facing both the empty chair and Chris because I thought it would be impolite to just talk to Chris if there
Okay.
really
Yeah.
was a ghost there, right? At this
Yeah.
point in my
Yeah. Yeah.
career, I didn't know what I believed about apparitions, about ghosts. Honestly, I didn't really
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
So the information we got about that, I'll get to that in a moment. But I did ask things like, "So Lois, what was it like when you were dying?" And the response that Chris gave us was, as she was dying in the hospital, she knew she was dying. She kind of did a life review. Couple things kind of came to her mind at that time. One was her family was not religious, and she didn't know if there was a heaven and hell, and she didn't know she wasn't. Let's say she wasn't a good girl. Let's put it that way. She wasn't a bad girl, but
Okay. Yeah.
parties and things like that. So she said, I didn't know
She
where I
wasn't
would
a
end
model
up.
Christian.
Right. Didn't know where I would end up. So I just wanted to go home. And then she said, or at least Chris said, she said that she closed her eyes in the hospital. And the next thing she knew, she was in the living room of the house, which was empty.
Hmm.
And it was empty for a year and a half. And she decided to wait for the next family or people to come in. If she liked them, she'd stay. If not, she'd figure out what to do next. Then I asked, okay, now Chris had seen her, and even the family members had seen her wearing different clothing every time they saw her.
Yeah.
So that's a question that comes up, where do ghosts get their clothes from? And occasionally she would be seen at different ages. Chris told us that as well. So I asked, I had an idea about this because this is a concept that appeared in very few books that were in print at the time. Let's put it that way. But it was
Hmm.
it was an old concept. But I asked Lois that question, and the response was interesting in a couple of levels. But she said, as far as I know, I'm just a mind, a floating mind, like a ball of energy, like some of those aliens on Star Trek, which was
Yeah.
kind of a nice tech tie-in.
But did she, but
And
did Lois say Star Trek, or did that, or are you just
Lois,
making that
well, I mean,
connection?
Chris said Star Trek, that Lois said Star Trek.
Oh. Oh.
Yeah,
Okay. Damn.
yeah.
So she was.
So I don't know if that was
Yeah.
Chris's
Interesting.
interpretation. I didn't. This is before the next
Okay. Yeah.
generation, but he could have been watching reruns of the original series, I guess. Um, and then she said that what was said was how she thought of herself, how she pictured herself, is how people who were able to pick up that thought would see her, because they're
Yeah.
not seeing her with their eyes, they're seeing her with their psychic senses, with their mind.
Right.
And that's one reason why ghosts can't be photographed, because they're not an optical phenomena at all.
Yeah.
So, all right. So then start asking, well, what does Lois want to know from us? And actually, there was some funny interplay. This was 85, and Chris had gone to see Ghostbusters. I don't know that Lois had actually gone to the movie theater with him, but she had seen commercials with him on TV. So
Yeah.
whether it was Chris or Lois asking us this question, so you guys didn't bring any equipment. Do you have stuff like in Ghostbusters? And I said, no. I made a joke about, unlicensed nuclear accelerators and
Yeah. Yeah.
things like that. And actually, we had a promise before we even went out that we wouldn't be bringing any blasters to get rid of her, or we
Of
wouldn't be
course.
trying to
Yeah.
get rid of her.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then the next question was, Loyd, what kind of new car do you want to buy? Joanna, do you really want to quit your job? And Kip, how long are you a professional dancer?
No way.
And none of those things had been talked about since we walked in. We had a tape running. I did check to make sure we hadn't simply forgotten that we talked about that. Those had not been said. I didn't even know Kip was going to come with me, so I didn't even tell Pat about that. So, and certainly didn't know Joanna was coming through. So even if I had said on the phone, I've got an old car, I'm going to drive down to Livermore. Um, the other two, there's no way that he could have known that. I said, well, how does Lois know this? Is she reading our
Yeah.
minds? Are you reading our minds, Chris?
Yeah.
And the response was, he looked very sheepish. He said, Lois didn't trust you guys because of the blaster thing from Ghostbusters. So she got herself to the university. She got in the back seat of your car and she rode and listened in
What?
on your conversation all the way down. Kip got a little green at that point because he was sitting in the back seat coming down. And, all right. So two things.
Yeah.
The only way they could possibly have known, other than a psychic way, is if
Yeah.
my car was bugged. There was
Sure.
no motivation. Literally not. I mean, this was not a case that they were planning on making money at. They weren't going to expose it. It was none of that stuff. So
Yeah.
there was literally no reason for that. And at that point, they would have had a notify. There's a whole bunch of things technologically that would have been necessary. If you think about the early 80s, I think the bugs would not have had that far transmission capability to Livermore, that far away.
Exactly.
No.
You like satellite dishes and all sorts.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So the other thing is that when I tracked down the cousin, he was willing to. I was worried he was not going to be willing to talk to me. But when I talked to the folks at the assisted living place, I said to them, "Look, a faculty member at John F. Kennedy University in parapsychology. We're checking into his cousin Lois's old house, which the folks say is haunted, and just let him know that we got family stories from the ghost of Lois. This is what the family has told us." And he was 92 years old. He was very excited to talk to us because if Lois is still around, maybe he can be around too. I mean, that's what he told me on the phone. Every one of the stories I started, he finished.
Wow.
So either Chris had found diaries going back throughout Lois's entire life, which Pat was positive didn't exist.
And memorize them.
Memorize them, yeah. Or Lois existed.
That's amazing. So you sat down and literally seemingly interviewed a ghost.
Yeah. It was like talking to somebody with a foreign language and having a translator.
Yeah.
Somebody who could understand English but couldn't speak English.
Did you expect that when you started this case, or was that kind of like you were?
I had no idea that we were going to get that lucky, or have that situation happen.
Oh my God.
Yeah, none whatsoever.
How did it? It must have been extraordinary. I mean, your mind must be just buzzing with questions.
It was. Well, I mean, we got to ask Lois questions that I had, and I was able to kind of funnel questions after the fact, also, because I was still in touch with the family for quite some time. One of the really interesting things was that, what the psychologist said about him having somebody to talk to every day, really played out as he was growing up. I mean, he was a good looking kid and girls were, around him all the time. And his mother was so proud of him because he was so good to girls. And I put that, having talked to Chris, I put that to him talking to a woman. He had a female confidant who nobody else could connect to. No repercussions.
Do you know whether she's stuck with him for years and years after?
She stuck with the house, with Pat in the house for when he left, when he grew up. Yeah. But he would come back and, come back and visit home and see that. The last time I talked to the family was 2004. So it's been 20 years at this point.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, did that case, did it change your perspective on what you believed? Did it sort of move you on that scale?
Absolutely. Yeah. It absolutely did move me to the point where I believe consciousness could survive death in some cases. The thing, and well, I should say not that it can survive death in some cases, but in some cases they stick around. Mediums talk about people passing on to another plane of existence, or what do you want to call it, dimension, whatever. And I suspect that there's some evolution of consciousness that changes after you die, but it still survives in some way after death. The ones we call apparitions or ghosts, the vast majority of ghostly experiences people have are with relatives, loved ones who either at the moment of, or shortly after the moment of death, or over a couple of day period, but not like sticking around forever. They don't stick around that long.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
they're there to kind of say goodbye to people, that kind of thing. There's a very small percentage that stick around for longer. And, you'll hear psychics on TV and other places say, well, they don't know they're dead. Yeah, a lot of them, some of them are in denial or say that they don't know that they're dead, but that's like getting a terminal illness and being in denial of that. I mean, it's
Yeah.
psychologically
Okay.
it's sound. But then there's plenty of other folks who just simply don't want to go because they're afraid. The fear thing, we've heard from witnesses and psychics ostensibly communicating with these apparitions. We hear that quite a bit, and sometimes it's just they want to have fun, or have one case still going on of a place the woman was murdered back in the early 1930s, and she's like a party. She likes to hang around the restaurant. She likes people. It has good memories for her when she was alive. So, and
That's
then the
amazing.
USS Hornet Aircraft Carrier Museum, those guys started appearing after they saved the ship from being scrapped. That's when people started seeing, maintenance people started seeing these guys, and they kind of came back, it seems, to make sure the legacy of the Hornet, which is very important in our history, continues as a museum. So they still work the
So the
ship.
Hornet is a battleship.
It's aircraft carrier, full-on
Aircraft
aircraft
carrier,
carrier,
sorry,
World
yeah.
War II, launched in 1943. It sits in Alameda, California, so outside of Oakland. It's been a
Yeah.
museum since 1998. It's the ship that picked up Apollo 11 and 12 when they returned from the moon.
Oh, cool.
And it also was
Interesting.
the lead ship in the Pacific Fleet from once it was launched in 43 till the end of World War II. It's the only ship that was never struck by enemy fire, even though there were
Yeah.
significant attempts on it, as if
Wow.
something was it was the second Hornet. It was the second Hornet of World War II. The first Hornet of World War II,
Hmm.
another aircraft carrier, was sunk at the Battle of Midway. And
Right.
some of the guys who I talked to who were serving aboard the ship during World War II always felt that the ghosts, the spirits of the guys from the previous Hornet were protecting the ship.
Yeah.
But it had
The new one.
a lot of records at that point in time. So really,
Fascinating.
really cool ship. And
So,
witnesses all aglore, people working there, people visiting there, all sorts of stuff.
and I think you've done investigations there as well, haven't you?
Yeah. Yeah. It was 99 is when I started. A psychic actually working with a couple of the folks on the board there brought me in to do a more, and she had a background in science herself. That psychic actually, it was the only psychic I ever met who worked at any sort of science organization. She had worked at Genentech for 20 years in data analytics. And
Oh my God.
she was doing readings for people at Genentech, and they said, you should hang up a shingle. You should do that. You shouldn't do what you're doing. So she had a really good background in
Yeah.
science. It was a really interesting experience working with somebody like that. And she had been checking out the Hornet herself and wanted a more thorough investigation. We did a lot of interviews with people, did a
Yeah.
lot of patterning on that, and had some really interesting experiences on it too.
Interesting. And it sounds like, you speak to a lot of people that have experiences, but you don't have those experiences yourself. Is that right?
Most of the time, but I will say that over the years, I've found myself in cases with sensing things, and I usually
Yeah.
kind of keep it close to the vest. I do work with psychics and mediums that I have vetted specifically for investigation because they're not all good at. It's like artists; not everybody can do the same thing.
Yeah.
And I'll usually not tell them what I'm feeling at all. And I've had my own, like on the Hornet, I had a couple of experiences where one of the things women reported for a while, and I think the guys have stopped doing it, guys meaning the ghosts, because they're all sailors, right? They were
Yeah. Yeah.
goosing women, pinching their rears.
What?
Yeah.
Oh
So,
my God.
and I was walking through for a TV show. I was walking through, doing a little experiment, bringing some people on that I knew that had not been on the Hornet, see what they might pick up. And my friend Jill, like, gave a little squeak ahead of me and kind of
Yeah.
moved herself a little bit and looked at me and like, Loyd. And it's like, what? It's like, you goosed me. It's like, and her husband's standing right next to me and he starts laughing because neither one of us are close enough to do that.
Yeah.
And after that, as that happened, something squeezed my arm, like, ha ha, kind of thing. So I felt that. And there was
Yeah,
another
like
time I
joking
was
with
doing
you.
something else where I was able to calm somebody down. And I felt being patted on the back, which was interesting because it wasn't a physical, it's definitely not a physical, it's a physical feeling, but not a physical touch. This was again
Hmm.
for another TV show. It was for Popular Mechanics for Kids. And the 14-year-old host was freaking out because he saw one of the ghosts. And I was calming him
Oh,
down. And,
wow.
and the camera guy is, I'm facing the kid. Camera guy's looking over my shoulder from a little way behind me. And I got a kind of puffy windbreaker on. And when that happened, I got patted on the back after the kid's like calmed down. It felt like, good job, Loyd. And I turned to him and I said, did my jacket move? He said, what are you talking
Yeah.
about? He said, nothing moved on your back. So I'll
How
feel things
weird.
from time to time, but I'm open to it. But I always tell people I'm the person who gathers everything together and tries to figure out what's going on. So I don't want to be coloring that with my own personal experiences most of the time.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, as you said, you've done years and years of investigations and spoken to so many people and gathered evidence and all that kind of stuff. Like, and with the Lois case, you've got apparitions that are, describing themselves as free floating energy, that have survived
Consciousness.
death.
Yeah. Consciousness.
And you've got, ghosts that, whether it's poltergeist or, people patting in the back or pinching bums of women, interacting with the environment. Like, have you got a theory or an explanation or, what do you think is actually going on? How do you explain this stuff?
So with apparitions, the idea of consciousness after we have three different categories of what people would call ghostly stuff. Poltergeists are related to living people, not to dead people. So it's
Hmm.
and they're all physical. So it's a different kind of phenomena. And then there's the residual hauntings or hauntings, which are the seeming ghosts that are locked in patterns. And those are just us picking up history, picking up stuff in the environment, information. That's our ESP. Or there's another model that suggests that our brains are capable of picking up information maybe in the geomagnetic field that is existing or in some other field that's there, physical field. So more of a biophysical
Yeah,
kind of thing that has not been tested because we don't have the money to test it. Wouldn't
yeah.
require very much money, but we can't test it right now. But with apparitions, going off of what Lois said, which actually is an old idea, that because we know a couple of things. We know that you got a bunch of people in a room and two people are seeing the ghost and they
Hmm.
describe the same ghost, but they may describe the same ghost facing them and they themselves may be facing different directions. So imagine you're in two different
Oh,
parts of the room facing
yeah,
different directions, but the ghost is facing you head on.
yeah,
All right. So that's a problem. Second
yeah.
problem, there's nothing about the human eye that should be able to pick up something that everybody can't see. And cameras should be able to pick because if you can see it, that means it's reflecting light or giving off light.
Sure.
So there's that problem. Ghosts are not optical. When people say they hear the voice of a ghost, why didn't everybody else hear it? And how come your recorder can't pick it up if it's an actual acoustical sound? So we get back to this, what Lois said, basically, which is that consciousness, the thing that survives death, the thing that is us, is capable, when alive, of doing some ESP and other similar things. The question I often put to people is, okay, you're a dead guy, you're a ghost. You do not have eyes that have a retina. So how do you see? Because light will just go right
Hmm.
through it. So
Yeah.
there's no rods and cones. How can you hear? You don't have an eardrum to react to acoustical sound. Therefore, it's got to be non-senses, non-sensory
Yep.
perception. It's perception. They see us with non-sensory perception, what we call ESP. We see them with ESP.
And that's it. Like, I think that I really understand the receiving part. There's an extrasensory perception that we don't understand yet, potentially. But it's the transmitting part that I think I'm having more. So is it on a different plane of
Well,
reality or quantum or?
really the question comes to it's the central question of what is consciousness, and
Yeah.
it's what is consciousness in the body, whether it's in the brain or the whole body or whatever else, or is it? There's some folks who put out the model that consciousness is not even resident in the brain or in the body, that we are
Mhm.
just the receivers. I don't necessarily subscribe to this. I'm just kind of putting this out there. So we
Yeah.
are an interface to consciousness, whether it's in us or outside of us, in that sense. The real question for an apparition for that kind of survival is, can consciousness be coherent and keep personality?
Yeah.
What is it made out of? That's the other question. What is it made out of? And
Yeah.
we're not even close to there yet in physics. We don't even know enough about the brain to say definitively
Yeah.
that it's in the brain.
I mean, if you had one huge achievement that you wanted to leave as your legacy, like if you could achieve something as a dream achievement and at the end of your career, what would it be?
I want people to recognize that these experiences that people report, whether they're the ESP of the living, these things of the living, or of the dead, apparitional experiences. I think it's really, because I don't know that you really will come to a definitive conclusion of survival of death until you get there.
Mm.
Um, but I want people to recognize that there's nothing supernatural about these things, nothing paranormal about these things. These experiences are part of the spectrum of human experience and abilities and capabilities. And we have, because of folklore and fear, because of religion and fear, we have set limits, and also because of the materialist perspective, which has held back some aspects of science in many respects.
Mhm.
Looking at it only that way, I want people to recognize that we are all capable of more than what they're telling us. And it's not some sort of conspiracy. It's just based in fear or dogma, one or the other. I'm hoping what I really try to cut through is for people to ask questions, that people should separate pop culture from what's really going on and what's important in these situations. And I hope, in the next number of years that I have left, that we end up with some advances in physics looking at consciousness, in other fields looking at consciousness, that gives some light to what the idea of consciousness capable of expanding or picking up information beyond the brain case, what's called non-local consciousness, that this is all real in that sense.
Brilliant. I mean, I always love just wrapping these things up with just advice for listeners, and I guess there's
Sure.
two sort of pieces that I'd love to ask you is for anyone listening that feels like they have been experiencing something or whatever, what kind of main piece of advice would you give to someone that may be feeling like they're experiencing a haunting or something to that effect?
So I would say, there are people in my field, myself included, of course, who you can contact, who can kind of shed some light on some things, at least point you in the right direction for certain references. There's some really good books that explain stuff, including mine,
Hmm.
of course. Um,
Yeah.
and I'd say that you should not be afraid to talk to others, especially in your family, unless you know for a fact their religious background, or you know, I guess you could say their belief about this stuff is overtly negative because they're just going to throw it
Yeah.
out the window. But there are plenty of
Yeah.
people. I found for a long time, I was meeting people here in the Bay Area. When they found out what I did, they would tell me their story. They're either a psychic experience, a ghostly experience, something like that. And I would always like to ask them, have you ever told anybody about this? No, because people are going to think I'm weird, but you're in that, so I can talk to you about it. And the sad thing is that there were occasions where I would be told a story by one guy, and then I'd meet his wife, and she'd find out about me and start telling me her stories. And neither one of them, and they weren't even the same stories, but neither one of them, they had common experiences, and they never talked about these things. And
Wow.
I suspect that if you had 100 people in a room and had everybody close their eyes and just say, raise your hand if you ever had a psychic experience or paranormal experience, the majority of people would raise their hand, as long as they don't look and see everybody else raising their hands.
Interesting. So it's all about basically just sort of, this is not a taboo subject. It's just
It is
something
not.
we should
It
be
is not.
talking about more. Yeah.
Right. And
Fascinating.
so Our organizations are always willing to talk to people or point you in the right direction for any of these experiences that you might actually have. And we deal with psychic experiences, not UFO or things like that. So it's
Yeah.
just important to make that distinction too. And just knowing there is nothing evil, malevolent. That's all pop culture. The paranormal TV shows are about spookiness. That's why they investigate in the dark, which is a stupid thing to do, honestly. I'll tell you very honestly that the vast majority of ghostly encounters and experiences have happened either during the daytime or with the lights on. So
Yeah.
it's one thing to do it at night. It's another thing to do it at night in perfect darkness, because the number of ghostly encounters or experiences in pure darkness that have happened outside the TV shows, of course, has been so minimal. Because if it's dark, how are you going to see the ghost? Well, of course, it's a thought form, so they look like they're lit up. But
Yeah.
people don't report getting woken up by ghosts. That just doesn't happen.
Interesting. And for anyone who's interested in following your footsteps, what advice do you have for anyone that would love to be a parapsychologist?
So there are resources, classes and places, for example, the Rhine Research Center, which is in its 90th year since the founding of the Duke Parapsychology Lab. We offer courses, online courses. I've had students from Australia and Thailand and England and all over the world, India, places like that. But we cover a lot of
Yeah.
different topics out there. Things on the ghostly side, on the investigative side, some serious research courses, if you're interested in that. So, and we have certificate programs as well. And then there are other places that offer single courses. There's a couple of folks in England who are, again, listed on my Parapsychology Online resources page. It's really easy to find us, but it's important to know that you should just check out who they are, because there are a lot of people who offer stuff that has nothing really to do with parapsychology. It's more pop
Mhm.
culture and folklore than anything else. And those courses are fun, but not if you want to be a serious parapsychologist or semi-serious parapsychologist.
And I guess it's not a career that people would jump into unless you're really passionate about it, because you're
It's
not going to
not a
make $1
money
million.
maker. It is not a money maker unless you can write a book that sells a lot of copies, which is incredibly rare.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just not. Yeah, if you think you're getting into it for the money, maybe some psychics and mediums can do that. But yeah,
Well,
we
you
don't
are
have.
providing a service,
Yeah, it's a service, and most of us in the field, and not everybody in the field deals with all the same phenomena, but we do feel like we're investigating mysteries, we're investigating the human condition. To me, it's incredibly unscientific to ignore the experiences, or as some pseudo skeptics will often say, "Oh, that's just mass hallucination." It's like, and to which I have to reply, I want to see the scientific studies on mass hallucination, because they really don't
hmm
exist. That's a
Yeah.
hallucination, actually, that they are there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's easy to give lip service.
Fantastic.
It's not easy to explore what's really going on.
Yeah. 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 Well, hopefully, in the future, things become much more into the light and accepted, and we can all talk about it a bit more. I've had other episodes where I had a death anthropologist, and it's all just about talking. The amount of solutions that can just
Yeah,
be about talking about stuff. So
makes
brilliant,
sense.
Loyd. At the end, I like to sort of offer you, chance to plug what you've got. Obviously, you've got you mentioned websites and all sorts of stuff, but just tell us, what can people hear you doing, where they can find you.
So my website again is loydauerbach.com. It's important to spell my name with one L. You can see it,
Mm-hmm.
hopefully you see it on the screen. If you're interested in ghosts, there's a whole FAQ on ghostly phenomena that's there. And a lot of, like I said, there's a resources page. I have a media page with many, many, many podcasts and TV things that are there that are linked out. If you want to, even a few lectures that I've actually done that are available to watch for anybody. But for classes, for education, there is the Rhine Education Center. It is linked from the website, but it's just simply, if you go to Rhine, that's RHINE.org, you can click on education and find all those opportunities. But even the main site, the Rhine Center site, has got videos in the media library that you can watch. Currently, I think they're all available. We have over 100 lectures on all sorts of topics. related to this subject. And you can get a lot out of that. And we hope that you would join the Rhine, and there are benefits for joining the Rhine Center and supporting the organization as well. And then if you're interested in the whole question of mediumship and the idea of life after death, there is an organization called the Forever Family Foundation, which I am president of, as it happens. It's foreverfamilyfoundation.org. You can join for free, and there's some good information on the site. We actually run grief retreats with the mediums and a grief counselor a few times a year in different parts of the U.S. We've been trying to figure out how to do them overseas. We haven't quite figured that one out yet. And we do scientific testing of the mediums, so they get certified. It's all volunteer.
Oh, wow.
The organization doesn't, we don't pay anybody for anything for any of that. And it's really all about supporting the work of evidential mediums in the family grieving process, and supporting the work of scientists looking at concepts of survival of bodily death. So apparitions, reincarnation, mediumship, all of that stuff. So looking at that from a very scientific perspective. And even our mediums go to science classes. So we've got a good group there. So, yeah.
Bro. Well, Loyd, thank you so much for taking the time to
welcome,
sit
Chris.
down and chat about all this stuff. It's been a fantastic conversation, and
Thank you.
really been honored to have you on.
Thank you. Anytime.
And that is a wrap on this week's episode. A huge thanks again to Loyd for sharing his incredible experiences with us. And a big thanks to you all for listening as well. If you'd like to learn more about Loyd's work, you'll find links to his books, his lectures and research in the show notes and on our website, noordinarymonday.com. And as always, you can find extra clips and visuals from this episode across our socials, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, and more, and our new community page as well on Facebook, which is just called No Ordinary Monday Podcast Community. Go and check it out. All right, so time for this week's listener story segment. If you want your story read out, head to the website and click the listener story page to record a short voice note, or you can write one up, or you can email hello, HELLO, at noordinarymonday.com with the listener story in the subject line. So this listener writes, since finishing my doctorate, I've spent most of my working life hopping from one medical conference to another, anywhere between 4 and 10 per year. On paper, it sounds glamorous. World travel, fascinating talks, clever doctors, cutting-edge science. In reality, it's basically cardio with lanyard and heels. These venues are huge. Think multiple football fields. No matter where your next meeting is, it's always on the opposite side of the hall, uphill somehow both ways. My step count is great, but my feet are not. And then there's the badge. Supposedly professional, but in practice, it flips backwards, tangles in my hair, and occasionally attempts to strangle me mid-conversation. I've accepted that we're mortal enemies. And networking is its own endurance sport. You cycle through the same small talk lines. Where are you based? First time in the Congress? How do you pronounce that molecule again? And after an hour of that, I trade my PhD for just a decent coffee, which, by the way, doesn't exist. There's a well-known rule of thumb at these conferences: the better the science, the worse the coffee. And travel? Well, let's just say glamorous is a generous word. I've eaten minibar peanuts during a Barcelona riot, and watched Atlanta descend into utter chaos over 3 snowflakes, all while trying to reach a hematology session. But for all the chaos, I wouldn't swap it. You learn a lot, you walk even more, and you come home with a lifetime supply of tote bags, dermatology creams, and branded pens. If you want to get into this line of work, my advice? Better shoes, stronger coffee, and lower your expectations for the Wi-Fi. That story was kindly sent in by my wife, who is actually at a conference as I record this. She is a management consultant working in the biotech and pharma industry. All right, so next week we head to the wilds of Namibia to meet Marlies van Vuren. She is a conservationist, filmmaker, and co-founder of the Nankuse Wildlife Sanctuary. It's a place where cheetahs, baboons, leopards roam just meters from her home, and where her team rescues, rehabilitates, and releases some of Africa's most extraordinary and endangered animals. Marlies' story is full of courage, chaos, and compassion, and trust me, you don't want to miss it. So hit subscribe now so you won't miss out on that. If you enjoyed today's episode and feel like doing something nice for us, just click 5 stars and maybe leave a review and tell a family member or friend. It really helps us spread the word and grow the show. We can attract more extraordinary guests for you guys, and we can also inspire new listeners for the community. And that's it. This show is independently produced, hosted, and edited by me, Chris Barron. Thank you so much for listening. Have a great Monday, everyone, and we will see you next week.